Matthew Smith, Dave Zed, hanging out. This is amazing. So Dave has been hanging out with us. We're having a wonderful time. It's beautiful out here on the ranch now. The weather's nice. Yeah. Summer's over. Dave brought the cool weather with him, and we're absolutely grateful for that. Matthew, you are hanging out with us. We're going to talk some amazing shit tonight. We actually have some incredibly cool stuff. You have been doing some amazing research. I heard also that you met up with a dear friend of ours, Kelly Harding, out there in Washington. You guys went on some beach he showed you. Do you mind just telling us a little bit about that and about yourself while we're at it?
My name is Matthew Smith. I run a YouTube channel that is currently semi on pause as I deal with some health issues, which we can or cannot talk about later as we wish. And I design, I'm an architect. I design primarily roundhouses, which is a whole lot of fun. My website is dreamdesignbuild.org. Wooden yurts, basically tricked out wooden yurts in really cool locations all over the country. And that's what I do for my bread and butter. And then on the side, I research old world architecture and ether energy and just all the fun stuff. And I get to rap with guys like yourselves, and brings me a lot of joy. So
thank you. This is awesome. This is great to be here.
Yeah, same. So what did you and Kelly find out there, and where were you guys at on this beach that she took you to?
Well, we never made it to the beach together. That's kind of on pause currently as well, but we'll get there. We'll get there. Okay. I went down to her house. And so Kelly is like third, fourth generation Seattleite. She's she knows this town. She's Seattle, and she's just super cool, man. And she invited me. She's been following my work on Marvelous Old World. And then you put us in touch, and we finally got together. And so what she has dug up on the beach, specifically, I think it's at Carkeek Park, which is on the Puget Sound. It's north of downtown by a couple of miles, and it is on the western shore of Seattle, facing Puget Sound. And she dug up, and there's a railroad going by there too. So between the beach and up by the tracks, she's dug up a bunch of melted bricks, like full on melted bricks. And they just look like, just putty, dripping, like frozen in time. And what she hypothesizes is that they came from the 1889 Great Fire in Seattle that wiped out downtown Seattle. And makes sense to me because, that's been a real focus of my research this past year. And it just brings up a lot of really strange and interesting questions. So that's the heart of it. And I guess the strangest and most interesting question of all is, how do you get heat hot enough to melt bricks?
Yeah,
when it requires 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit to melt brick. That's extreme heat. That's hotter than your urban conflagration.
Well, jet fuel can bring down a couple of steel sticks, so why wouldn't that work, right? It's interesting when you talk about this melted brick idea, because then we're talking about ancient technology, basically, right? Because what now creates a fire that would be hot enough to burn at those temperatures to melt this type of brick? And then the question would be, are you able to maybe locate and recover some of that brick and perhaps be able to tell like how it was destroyed? Would there be a residue perhaps? Like the glass, the vitrified glass, for instance, over in the, I think, Gobi Desert, right? Sahara Desert. There's this site over there, and this is also allegedly the site where they talked about these Vimanas having these great weapons and this nuclear war occurring, and vitrified glass is one of these things where sand gets hot enough to turn into glass like that. But it does take these crazy temperatures that mankind allegedly didn't possess the technology of at that time, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. The Vajras, like, the devices with the trident, kind of three-dimensional trident on both sides with like that knob in the middle that looks like a 0 point sort of Z-pinch type diagram. Vajra means both lightning and diamond, which is interesting because if you think about the power that takes to actually vitrify, sand, let's say, like to turn sand into glass, right? Lightning can do that, but a thunderbolt of the god, like it's talked about exactly in all the ancient scriptures talk about the thunderbolts of the gods, and then the images of Zeus holding a trident, or it's I think that's referring all to the same thing. And it's and this gets into the work of Immanuel Velikovsky, where he talks about planets in he's got several books, but Planets in Collision or something, where that the Newtonian idea of a stable clockwork solar system is actually not really true, that
right,
it's an unstable system. And then if planets, which are charged bodies, if they get wander too close to each other, they will actually discharge and create an electrical arc in the form of thunderbolts. So Thunderbolts Project is a wonderful organization on YouTube that has just oodles of videos getting into the plasma physics of all of this, the electric universe theory. Dave, I know that you're deep into this stuff.
You described what happens when you put two capacitors close to each other, right? You have an automatic spark discharge between the two. So
that's it.
Yeah.
So that's one idea of how this sort of phenomena could have come about. And then you get into instant petrification and petrified wood and all the, biblical accounts of carving valleys and canyons and mountains raising and terraforming landscapes through plasma discharges and this sort of phenomena.
What's interesting is that the what was that called? That thing we
Vajra.
The Vajra. It's interesting to note that it's something that I know that Elon Musk has tweeted out that he claims to sleep next to. But more importantly than that, it speaks to what you said about the Z pinch, and then about the infinity symbol and this repetition of that. But also, it's interesting when you guys had talked about just discussed earlier a few minutes ago what could have melted these types of bricks. Well, if they were using what you'd call like longitudinal scalar waves, then you could technically have the post burn look as if it was burned, but when the actual process happened, it would actually be more like a very cold fusion type situation where the internal mass is then being pulled out of the object itself in a very cold way. This is basically using heat to produce cold to then extract mass out of an object and make it basically, whether it's a submarine or a brick, basically just deflate like jello. Now, there's been some theory that this is what was also used to bring down the Twin Towers, as you referenced just a few minutes ago. But that's one way that it could work. And the ironic thing is, this goes back to our chat the other day about normal calorimeters would not detect this.
Yeah.
Because by definition, there's no set parameter or spectrum by means to which measure this effect from.
This is what's fascinating. We talked about, we talked about some events occurring in such a way to where the tools are calibrated so that they'll pick up and detect and find this, but it's got nothing to do with that. They were calibrated to find that, but also they're calibrated not to find this other energy source, which is why it's sort of not only kept from you, but the machines won't even pick it up. So it's not even detectable. So this is what's fascinating about this idea, is that maybe it was something that can resemble something else like melted bricks, but really it was something completely, I guess, sort of natural, And it's one of these things to where now it's, what's the question of technology versus magic versus science versus just knowledge? Like, was just a combination of things that they knew how to put together. Because then that's, in my mind, a little bit more in the realm of knowledge, but we'd call it technology. Technology. Does that work?
Yeah, I like that one.
Technology.
Yeah. And there's that A.C. Clarke quote, I think, any technology sufficiently advanced will appear as magic.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Sort of thing.
And that seems to be what we're mostly talking about with this kind of stuff when you really look at it, because it's gaslit in a way from you that it even exists at all.
Yes.
The detectors can't detect anything. You're told it's crazy and you can't look at things that way because it goes against the science, right? But then really you're gaslit against your own observation to kind of dick with your discernment.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's what happens, and that creates a debate amongst people in society, and next thing you know, you've detracted from the thing that you were even focusing on to begin with, and therefore you end up like what we have now, where we don't know what caused the we don't know if there's anything of that type that occurred during the 1889 Great Fire. And so it just it's something that just gets kind of lost to history, right?
So his story. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, right.
And Matt, you were showing on a presentation we had on the website that you did with us. It was this awesome question and answer. And thank you so much for that. That was incredible. You had images, I think they were woodcuts or just drawings, but they were newspaper clippings, some of them, of airships laser beaming down in the 1800s. Like, what were they laser beaming? They weren't spotlights because they were laser beaming, and then fire was coming out only exactly where they were shooting in some of the images to depict it. That's the origin point of it.
I think those images were from the First World War, I believe. But yeah, it begs the question, like, what the hell? What are they showing there? There's a lot of those portrayals of airship, Zeppelins, whatever, where it's not bombs being dropped. It's some kind of, it looks like an energy weapon coming out of the belly of these ships and blowing up the cities below. And how terrifying is that? But it begs the question of how far back does this technology go? Right. And so, when you get into the urban fires of the late 1800s, like in Washington, I pointed out that Seattle, Ellensburg, which used to be a prominent city in central Washington state, now it's a state, and Spokane, which is on the eastern side of the state, all of those, just the downtown, all of them burned down within 1 month of each other in the summer of 1889, at the same exact time that Washington Territory was holding a statehood convention where the federal, the United States Federal Federation wanted to drag the territory into the Union. And so all of a sudden there's this like shock and awe campaign going on where these downtowns are burned down. And, it's not like the storybooks tell us, old Mr. Leary's lantern knocking over, the lantern in the shed, and it's a wooden, ramshackle outpost town made out of matchsticks ready to go up. No, we've so many people in this research field have looked at these photos, and these were old stone, brick, masonry, ornate, old world urban centers.
Yeah. Yep.
So like just sorry to tie it in a bow, like when Kelly's finding these bricks melted on the beach, that could have been from that time. It just, like I've been saying, stones don't lie. We can suppose what we want, but when you've got the actual object in front of you and say, well, how did this happen? How did this melt?
And this is the question, though. This brings up what Dave and I were talking about can you fake what something looks like by doing something else? Meaning an energy source or a technology that you're told is crazy and that doesn't exist, right? Like the ability to melt bricks or to be able to turn them into complete liquid and melt them into place, like we see in some of these ancient structures before they were stacked on with the haphazard little rocks that they found everywhere from the previous or the later societies, right? So there's this advanced way of looking at the world beforehand. And it seems that it was just ubiquitous. It was everywhere because you find this neoclassical architecture, this old world architecture, even in Australia, New Zealand, all over the world. It's the same damn kind of architecture around the same time. And then all these pictures where you're supposed to believe that this huge monolith was created in whatever time that they said it was dirt streets and nobody in any of the pictures. So this town doesn't even look habitated. Yeah. And then, but whenever you go to these buildings, and Matt, this is something you and I have spoken about before. When it says founded, that doesn't mean that they built the motherfucker. That means that they found it and just slapped their name on it. And there's fascinating cases of these whole centuries being wiped off of plaques that are crazy, just wild numbers. So this is what fascinates me so much. And I love the work that you're doing. And shout out Mac Turillian as well for the Great Deception podcast. Yeah. Brother, he's the one that connected us all. But amazing kind of work that y'all do here. And it's just fascinating to me, dude. And especially now we're talking about airships because we did the Del Show episode. And that just lights me up, man. I love shit like that.
It makes you think, because when you look at World War II and you look at World War One, and you don't really know why World War One was started, and that and then you look at the Hindenburg crashing. So it's interesting, and then you look at some of this footage that I've put up quite a while ago, but on my Instagram, showing the Germans doing commercials. This was before World War II was started, but you're talking about, for example, if I'm not mistaken, things like maglev trains. You had all that kind of stuff, and you had engineers out of like Michigan in the 1930s and 40s, just again before World War II, talking about how they could power entire towns off of just like $5 a month or whatever. So even converted to today's, like, I think still nothing significant. And so it's interesting to see that when all of this happened, it was almost as if there was no problem with these things existing within Europe to a particular degree. But the second it got into the market, or the public consciousness, more specifically of North America, it seemed as though, and I'm speaking particularly to the Hindenburg, it seemed as though that there was something. It looked like something needed to be done. So you had the burning of the Hindenburg, and then it's just very interesting, because the burning of the Hindenburg, at least in terms of what I can understand with respects to the historical cross-reference, seems to align as well with I think it was President or Chancellor Hindenburg or something like that was first in command, and then Hitler was right below him before Hitler took power. So it was almost that, they built this great ship, and then you name it after the leader or whatever, and then all of a sudden, what do you know, it burns down when it gets to America. So
also sort of a I heard as well, to add to this, sort of psyop against helium and that type of air travel. So they wanted to ban helium as a substance because of how dangerous it was, and they said that that's why it went up like that. And so it was this huge smear campaign against helium. And now, of course, the number one consumer of helium, anybody
NASA.
On the planet?
It's NASA.
That's right. They're inflating all of those things.
They're the biggest
to send them up there.
harvester of helium.
Yeah, well, they got to. It's a lot. There's a lot of balloons to fake what they're doing. So it's interesting, though, when now we look at it from that angle, because it puts a whole new spin on this. But still, then you tie in the foundlings, these hundreds of thousands of children that were just shown the fuck up and trained from one side of the country to another with no parents. They were just orphans, just here. Take these kids. Who needs a baby? Here, take 3. The incubator stuff set up in the World's Fairs, that was just weird. I mean, maybe just people were into different shit back then, but it just seems odd. You know what I mean? The
helium thing, if I could say very quickly, the helium, there's more to it than just that. That picture on the far left right there, those images are real.
It's a video, so let's...
The top one at the very least, Yeah,
and then here's the thing with this too, and good point. Do you mind telling us about this? As I pull it up. Audio-only audience, check the show description down there. There's a video link, and you guys can just go check it out, or on YouTube or Odyssey or Rockfin or any of that. To come check this out, because we're sharing photos. We're having a good time. You can see Dave's pretty face too. He's got the beard grown out. It looks good. Matthew's rocking it.
So the thing with the ships is, I can say, what I can say first and foremost is that, and I ask people to read between the lines here, helium also has much more of a significant purpose than just putting things into balloons as well. It can lead to over unity, where again you get far more energy coming out than what you're putting in, so you can argue free energy in that regard. It can lead to things far more advanced, let's just say, than the airships. And I think that there was a long foresight held by elements that wanted to suppress this, saying, okay, if the airship's already done, what's going to come after that? So I think there were a lot of reasons and that mutually benefited a lot of different groups that wanted to keep this quiet as to why helium should be suppressed. And if you look now at the price of, I believe it's helium, it is quite expensive. So it's and then you see NASA harvesting the most of it, and of course being used for balloons, but it can be used for other things as well. And that's also why it gets interesting, because when it comes to things like pneumatic valves, right, during this time as well, there's talk where we see on the screen, there was also the talk of these tube transportation valves and these underground subway valves that were pneumatically basically driven, or pneumatically propelled. And what's interesting about that is that that's something that just completely has been dismissed from the public eye in terms of this form of just pneumatics and this form of transportation. I believe it's transport, and then pneumatic, PNEU. TAMIC. MATIC, sorry. Not pneumatic. remove the A and the T.
I love that we're live on this doing this. Okay.
Yeah, just put IC. Don't worry.
Jesus Christ.
It'll be fine.
Okay, here we are.
Here we go.
Do you want me to put Old World? Yeah.
This one here, bottom right.
Yes, I've seen these as well. Look at this shit. This is so cool. This was just how you got around. Yeah,
the pneumatic valves, right? And this, of course, would have provided a tremendous threat to, which is also interesting, by the way, because 1903 was the year that the whale, like killing whales, that industry basically disappeared within probably 12 to 18 months, because what happened with that was they were using, I believe, the whale oil for transportation, but then petroleum and gas and all that was discovered at in 1903. So it's interesting that this was allegedly happening in the late 1800s, and then 1900s going into World War I, it was sort of like putting the icing on the cake of removing at the very least, the knowledge of this type of stuff. And then World War II really put the icing on the cake.
This is what's so fascinating, because you could just simply say it's outdated. Say it's old, and this is better and new.
Right, exactly. And this is the thing, right? So if you have...
but it's not. We have examples of this shit in our everyday existence. Every time you get a new phone, you're just like, okay, well, shit. It's going to be awesome for a minute and then turn out way faster than it should. And things are meant to go to shit, like the 100-year light bulb. We talked about this.
Yes. But there's a lot that has to do with compressed air that can lead to lots of forms of transportation that doesn't harm the environment and is also quicker and faster in speed for their respective vehicles than gasoline.
Yeah, and that's what they talked about in that Charles A. Delshaw book, The Secrets of Delshaw, but Dennis Crenshaw. You guys definitely pick this up. It's on my reading list this year. Again, we've talked about it, so check that episode out, but beautiful work. And what they talked a lot about on there was compressed air, little pumps and machines and generators, but then also an NB gas.
Yes.
So could they have been calling helium NB gas there, or was it something else?
I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to see in terms of what they referred to in NB gas relative to helium.
Right.
What I can say, though, is when they talk about things like pumps and valves and compressed air, think about the same way that we talk about these days about pulsing a laser beam, for example. Think about when you pump compressed air in a tube. That's a form of a pulse.
Right.
So if you had that sort of pulsing understanding, regardless of how it was viewed and explained, it's very feasible for this to have been actually happening, transportation-wise.
And this is the thing. It's so simple
that's the thing.
Pretty much anybody can do it, which is why they have to specialize all this shit and proprietarize all of it.
Sure, and if they were to bring it out again, I'll just kind of leave it at this, is it would kind of be a sort of very highly regulated, only certain companies can have access to the core materials that require this. You got to pay a certain amount of money every month or some type of subscription fee to be able to ride them. And so this also speaks to what's attempting to occur today, in the sense of, there are companies coming out where you buy the car, but you can never buy the battery, so you have to rent the battery, right? And this goes to the whole own nothing, be happy. Now, I'm not trying to say glass half empty. I'm just saying that it seems like it's the same freaking playbook every X amount of years.
Well, it's funny too, because it seems to be going back to this simplicity in some ways, but they're just putting more lights on it. So it probably operates the exact same way. You're like, why's steam coming? Why's smoke coming out? No, it doesn't. You're good. Yeah. It's pneumatic, or there's simplified ways of doing this.
Right.
And it seems, just like the bank, the thing at the bank, that's awesome. That's Futurama, right? That they do that? They hop in that thing and shoot them across?
Yeah.
We're almost there, guys. Matthew, how are you doing, dude?
I'm hanging. Yeah. I wanted to circle back. David, you said something about, you just raised a question, like, why did World War I happen? It's like these things just happen. But like when you piece it all together, when you string all these events together, go back to the Civil War, and then you have the urban conflagrations all across the United States and beyond. All throughout the late 1800s. Then you have World War I, you have World War II. And it just, and it seems, if you put it all together, it really does seem like just a long-term plan to systematically deconstruct this old world technology, culture, architecture, Antiquitech, like all of these old systems that ran on, let's just say, ether energy to kind of put a bow on it.
The other thing, to your point, Matt, is we see here in this picture the pneumatic tube mail system in New York City. So we see, again, it's interesting. You're likely to find pictures of the mailing system, but not of anything.
Transportation.
Human. Yeah.
They showed one with a cat going into it, actually. They said they stuffed a cat into one of these things. So it's interesting. Right here. So for everybody watching.
Is that the cat?
Yeah, the cat's in there. I suppose that's what we're led to believe is the cat. But look how big that thing is. I mean, it's interesting. You could just see that as being a simple sort of backyard thing, maybe for your groceries or something, but really maybe just outside there was something way cooler for humans, and it was much more scalable to industry.
Right.
But they do have that one of that dude laying in that tiny coffin little tube, and he's supposed to be a good representative for this idea, and absolutely not. I don't know if you've seen this. It is terrifying looking. He's supposed to, I'm going to find this. Again, audio only audience. Check this. There's the little guy.
Yeah.
Fuck that. What do you think? And you're heading head first.
I'll be honest with you. I'd do it if I thought it was safe. I would do it.
Yeah, because back then you could trust people, right?
Well,
you could trust what you were being told.
If it was something, 10, 20 minutes, you get to a certain place, I have no problem. I'll take a nap in the tube. I'm cool. That's me, though. But
Matthew, what are your thoughts on this type of transportation?
I'd go. I'd definitely do it.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Well, there you go. Yeah. You guys, I'll meet you there.
Well, we see. Right, this
sure
one as well.
This one's better. I'll ride in that one. But that's like that submarine that just collapsed on those people. You know what I mean?
That's true.
But look right here. How does this operate then? Because it's rails, but is it floated or magnetics, or what do you think?
Could be magnetics, could be some type of pressure on the outer rims of the actual structure itself, not of the actual transportation tube, but of
those look like tracks. I think there was rollers under that thing.
Right. Yeah, it looks probably rollers. And
do you think they lifted it with air, like that air hockey type deal?
If they did,
you could shoot compressed air up under the bitch as you roll.
I don't rule it out at all. I don't know if it was the go-to thing, but because to me it would just make sense. Like Matt said, you put the rollers and then you just pump the valve and that's it. But it would not surprise me if they did.
See, this is tracks, but I mean, no signs of electricity anywhere.
Right.
You know what I mean? No wires or anything to speak of, but
so how did the helium come into this? Was that what ran the pneumatic process, or how did that? You mentioned
could say there's a significant part of helium that helps to run the pneumatic. Oh, is that an actual picture?
Yeah.
Okay.
Holy crap! Pneumatics, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, the helium, basically, when you compress any type of plasma, largely argon, helium, cryon, I think it is. What can then happen is. Oh, that's an interesting one. What can happen is then the same way we talked about like the laser pulsing example, you then compress essentially in particular the electrons. So what happens is the second you let it out of that compressed environment, the electrons basically want to essentially jerk very freely after that. So if you can align it in a certain direction with a strong enough pump, there's your transportation.
Amazing. And so they want to get rid of, or make helium scarce, and it's just kind of like with mercury. Like suddenly, mercury in our time, mercury became this very dangerous.
Well, the same thing when they talk about nuclear, completely. Exactly, like nuclear, same thing. So they can use those boring tunnels that are nuclear powered to make those tunnels no problem. It's for the military, it's safe, but God for the people, it's not safe. Okay,
right.
It's
They power submarines with it. Fine.
Yeah,
that's cool. Don't you dare power that neighborhood for a fraction of the cost.
Right.
How dare you? This is fun. Look at this with the hanging child track thing, so you can have your meal in peace. And actually, look at this line of strollers down here. That was sort of your babysitter in the old world. You just send them out on this little floating tram, which
seems
is
like people
amazing.
Trusted each other a lot more.
That's what I'm saying. It's like a community, dude.
Yeah.
But I mean, they had like hundreds of thousands of free kids, so they could maybe they were like, I could give up a few. I don't know. That's why the playgrounds look the way they did. But look at this shit. I mean, these were these cars in tube things, and this just looks like a wheel, dude, like a spoke or something. And they just jam it into this configuration.
Well, the wheel wouldn't have to move until until the pump is put in, and then that's it. The wheel, the pump. The pressure that releases on the back end just moves the wheels, and that's it.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah, easy peasy.
Yeah.
I like that we have Dave here. He does make it easier.
Oh, look at that one on the far left.
Yeah, this is dope as shit. Guys, we're just looking at pictures, audio only audience. Thanks for hanging out. Wow.
That one, and then also that one there at the bottom.
This little guy?
Yeah.
Yeah, look at that. Look at the scale of the way
that's what I'm saying. They knew what they were doing. That's the thing that's so ironic about all of this.
That was a finger for a Voltron that they had back then.
Right.
Yeah, so they knew.
God.
Yeah.
Just this kind of shit, dude. Doesn't it make you just want to get a goddamn time machine and just watch? I just want to go walk around, check it out. I get UFOs. You know what I mean?
No, but I'm with you.
I get like space travelers and shit. Like I don't get them. I don't agree with them fucking with people.
Right.
I get a hands off thing with that, but I would personally, but that's just me. But I would love to just be a fly on the wall in any of these places and just go check all this cool shit out.
Oh, absolutely.
Look, they were just building stuff like this just for the fuck of it, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah, the scale was enormous, and it makes me think of the world, some of the World Fair buildings, like the manufacturers building. The Chicago World's Fair was big enough to hold 300,000 people, and they built all of this in 2 years. And that whole, that storybook tale that they attached to it. But I was looking at construction photos with Matt from Great Deception. And I was just looking at the interior of the manufacturer's building. I said, you know what, dude, I think what this is an airship hangar. I think this was used to manufacture airships because it's the perfect scale for that.
Right.
And it's funny that they say there are temporary structures because that is a steel beam structure.
And that's when you call bullshit on the temporary claim.
Oh yeah. Well, I called bullshit long before that, but that kind of just puts the punctuation mark at the end of it. Yeah, it's
right. See, that's the thing. We see things like this, for example, that that make you go, okay, how much of this was scuttled off for secret?
And how much of this is just pose? Look at these dudes just posing. They're not putting this guy in a suit. Look how clean their white shirts are. Okay,
right.
You're not wearing this shirt to suit some oily ass thing up with water dripping everywhere. This dude's not doing anything. This is a staged photo.
Right.
And this is the other thing about this, that they have that sort of technology. They also produce clunky images like this that make you think there was no way they were flying around. Look at what these dickheads were doing.
Yeah, that's another thing.
They still had phones with cables. But I mean, it looks super staged. And we're going to have Kelly on, actually. I invited her for this, and Get Better, Kelly, sending you healing vibes there. She isn't feeling well. But she is a photography expert as well. And she goes through these Washington University archives and goes, that's a Photoshop photo, historical. She goes, they were using Photoshop back then. And she could prove it. I mean, it's fascinating.
Yeah, she showed me a little bit of the techniques that she uses to run old photos through Photoshop and apply certain filters, and then she could detect the outline of where they were cropping and so forth. It's very fascinating.
Like what they're doing with NASA, because they had the moon outline, all the moon photos you can scale a certain way with the contrast, and you could see that they faked the motherfucker and they plugged it in there. Look at this jetpack. What year was this?
1600s.
Yeah, no shit, right? Yeah, good call. I mean, this kind of this is just awesome. I don't know if this is real or not. And of course, we're just pulling up pictures. We don't know what. And now you can't say, oh, this is an AI recreating something. These are fucking dope. The cycles that they had, the unicycle thing. That was a motorcycle, and they were like kids ride around on this thing. Have you seen this?
Yes.
How do we make more of these happen?
What's interesting is there's some, if you watch some world, it's very difficult to point out, but if you watch some World War II footage or documentaries on YouTube, you'll see some of the footage that is used. You can actually see some of them on this, but it's very brief. It's not like it's anything, it's like it's almost, it's not wanted to be seen.
Because this is some Star Wars fucking Attack of the Clones shit, dude. I mean, this is, you mount a machine gun or two on the side of this thing. You have a couple of them together. You got a serious combative element.
Initially, when I started seeing these images, I thought, wow, how cool, but it all seemed experimental. But then you just keep seeing more and more and more images, and it's just
different
endless,
versions of
and you
them.
realize, wow, right, different versions. And this, this stuff was at some level, much of it was being mass produced, like electric cars and so forth 120 years ago.
Right. See, what a silly comparison. Let's appreciate here that we have an ad for I'm not even gonna say the name of it. Fuck them. This thing is a trust. It actually looks cool as shit. Do you want to go get a couple of these? Right around
cool.
So you have this though next to this old, this guy saying, yeah, what are y'all doing? We had that a long fucking time ago.
Yeah, no, well, and that's why, for example, if we for a second here, if we scrolled up,
please.
I'm going to presume that this is real for a second. If that's the case, man, this is a big middle finger to society now, because it speaks to the whole, again, the concept of all of this having been, or to a large degree, this understanding of, such concepts already being developed back then. And terrible to say, but at least for me, in my opinion, it certainly speaks to why to why war would have had, in the eyes of people that wanted to keep this stuff quiet, would have had to have occurred to create a sort of massive, like, I don't know what this thing is on the bottom right.
It looks dope as fuck. I don't know either, but
oh,
it looks
outrageously
Dave, I'd like to try to
outrageously
speak to that a little
edited.
bit.
So
sure.
I think that the system that has rolled over the old world in this last 150 years or so, give or take, is based on debt.
Yes,
it's all based on debt. So everything they do when when the central bank generates more money, somehow just comes out of the ether to another war and another to open another war front is like endless money because they just produce the money, which is basically creating debt, pulling, like Gregory Mannarino is great to listen to if you're trying to figure out the economic side of it. They're pulling the wealth out of the future,
right,
in the form of debt. And that's the system. And it's a vampire system. And so, I look at the old architecture, we all grew up in this system, right? And our minds, our consciousness are shaped by the age that we grew up in. But I look at these old world buildings and they're so ornate and like no expense is spared to make it as beautiful as it possibly can.
Yeah.
And the only thing that makes sense is that those buildings were built under a different system that wasn't debt based.
Yeah. Yes.
And that the more, if you think about these buildings, that they actually were doing something functional when they put these spires and domes and Antiquitech antenna, that they actually were using piezoelectric materials and properties and generating electricity to somehow like radiant fireplaces, to heat the place naturally or, through this ether energy. The more spires and domes and antenna that they built, the more energy they were drawn down. And that energy was going directly into the inhabitants. Whereas our built environment is completely the antithesis of that, where it's all extractive, it's all subtractive. It's, you're drawing from resources, the occupants, like the vitality of the human beings that occupy those buildings is being drained to keep those buildings going. Like think about just a modern office building.
It's a complete, it's just a system of constant drainage in every aspect. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. What's Dinosphere runs on one wheel?
1932.
Yeah. See, this is,
it was told to the public in 1932. How long before that do you think that it was actually there? Or do you think that they actually invented shit along with the public's knowledge of it and they sort of maybe got input?
This is where it gets interesting. I think we can propose a potential mix of all of it. Because this looks like a time, and I'm just interpreting, where, like you said, Matt, the system was different and there was much more inclination for, or at least people seem to have much more time to be inclined to create. And so it could have been, a lot of it was suppressed long ago, and then put out at this point. It could have been a combination of people working on it and getting, put in a news article, and then then people giving their input and vice versa. I mean, we have as well as we have Otis T. Carr, who was a protege of Tesla and who had constant talks with Tesla and Einstein in the 1930s. He had developed a craft of, in fairness, he given a fair amount of funds to build it, but it basically wood, aluminum, electromagnets, and essentially built a craft that the FBI then later, because it worked, had to raid and seize, and he was sentenced by the SEC for some fraud stuff that never actually happened, and so on and so forth. But it's interesting to see that all of this seemed to happen around, again, late 1800s, early 1900s, and then there was like a zip up on all of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Roswell case. Saucer crash. I mean, weather balloon. Weather balloon, right?
Yeah.
Man, it's just like, and it's just so cool. And you got this little kid here. Look at that.
But what's interesting, and maybe this is just me, but it seemed like people look like they actually cared in these pictures. You know what I mean? Like, like you said, Matt, there was genuine craftsmanship and passion put into it. It wasn't something that was like, okay, we're gonna build this thing. It's gonna last for a couple of years, and that's it. We're gonna leave it alone. This looked like something that you could have probably had for an entire lifetime in terms of being able to maintain it, and whether it was a ship or a something like this or whatever.
And it's free time is what we're talking about here. And I'm glad that you guys brought it up.
Right.
It's that these folks had the time to do this. They could be creative. They could go nuts on things, which means that they weren't, we could just logically deduce, killing themselves with work to the degree that we are now, right? I mean, even my grandparents, their house was like 40 grand when they first bought it, and it was like two story huge, right? So we know how that works. And so it's interesting even to think about then a society with this much ingenuity, just letting folks do stuff. And that's why you were coming up with so many cool discoveries. And like you were talking about, Dave, it's just when we start to look at some of the more interesting work going on now, then you start to think about, which one?
That one right there, yeah.
You start to think about that people were discovering things that they shouldn't have been probably back then because of how readily available it is.
Exactly. And that, see, for example, presuming this is accurate, Portugal, 1910s. This makes, I mean, there's footage on YouTube where if you watch World War II documentaries, they show a little bit of this, where they show people in the 20s and 30s with the cameras, riding the scooters along in Germany, or what was called Prussia. So it was there. It just seems as though there was a strong effort to limit the basically to limit the showcasing of this.
Well, and then they didn't
at least afterwards.
I get, we're assuming here, this is a presupposition that they didn't have the internet and that they didn't have a way of telling a bunch of folks about really cool stuff, or they didn't have a need to suppress it.
If you had a worldwide or a semi-global pneumatic mail system, you can get messages across pretty darn fast.
That's fair. Yeah.
Right? That's to your point, I'm saying, like, this, all it takes is one guy to do his sketches and his work of his thing, and then fold it up, put in a pneumatic thing, and send it off.
It's in Germany now from Paris.
It's in Germany from Paris. Someone else copies it. You go, yeah.
Wow, and the information was just shared like that. But it could also be semi-private in a way too, because you could make sure those tubes only went like to your buddy.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
Like the straight cup string thing, that only goes to my friend's treehouse, and I know that. I know he's going to be on the other end because the sign says "No girls allowed." His sister would never pick it up.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. But it's fascinating when we get to into what we call this Antiquitech, because just the building designs, and again, it seems like if these people did build these buildings, that they were also doing just some crazy cool shit. And maybe that these things, because we don't see a lot of construction photos, we see a lot of deconstruction photos of the World's Fairs.
Right.
But construction photos just sort of, an Ed Lee Scallion thing maybe, that he didn't want to be seen, or they didn't want, or maybe they were scrubbed, right? And not all of them, we can't just make these wild assumptions about anything, but there's way too much evidence for us to not to consider other possibilities.
Right. No, I completely agree.
Plus, it's fun. It's just cool as shit. Look at this.
Yeah.
These airships, man, that gets me going.
That's the thing, right? And then it just makes you think about, breakaway civilizations or any of that kind of, Yeah.
Yeah, like this kind of stuff. I love this. This is what the world would be if MTV just kept playing music. I love those memes. Anyway, so Matt, what do you think about this, dude? Do you think that this is something that is possible in this realm with the current folk we got walking around here?
I think what we're looking at now is like this urban fantasy. I think we're quickly moving away from whatever future that they had envisioned. Like, I guess there was a time where the cities were a cool place to be, and now they're not. And so maybe this will come around again, but it's not going to be in our lifetime. I don't think. I think we're better off, doing what you're doing there, Brandon, and just hunkering down in the countryside, and just building an alternative to the mess that's being made of the cities right now. They're being turned into, it's like the end game for this whole 150-year project, and it's to turn them into free range, human zoos,
zombies,
or whatever. It's like zombies. Full of it's Seattle, man. I lived right next to it, and it's just, on the one hand you have no end of skyscrapers, no end of condos being built all over the place. There's construction, and all this like whiz bang technology and wealth, and then on the street level, you just have like misery in these homeless encampments and fentanyl zombies and craziness. So it's it's collapsing in real time, but they're getting ready to roll out the new iteration, and I'm trying to get out of here. Like I'm trying to get out of here as much as I can.
This holiday season, you might be looking for nutritious, convenient meals to keep you energized on jam-packed days. Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal delivery service, can help you fuel up for brekkie, lunch, or dinner with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. They just drop them at your door, people. You'll save time and eat well. You'll stay on track with your healthy lifestyle while taking all of your holiday to-dos in stride with good meals in the tum-tum. If you're too busy with all this stuff, these meals are easy to get done. They taste great. All you've got to do is head over to factormeals.com/expandingreality50 and use code expandingreality50 to get 50% off. That's code expandingreality50 at factormeals.com/expandingreality50 to get 50% off.
If I could say quickly, a point that speaks to all of this in terms of the potentiality of this stuff actually being built back then to strong and very high degrees of engineering is that I have a document that I came across the other week, which was from the early 70s. It was it was done through a Freedom of Information Act request by a journalist who got an inside tip or something. In 1974 or 76, one of the two, something like that. But basically what it discussed was in 1971, there were all these patents filed under the U.S. Secrecy Patent Division. And what was interesting was that it was found that during the process, and I don't know if the journalist that got this, if it was a mistake or not, but the process of submission found that the military, of course, had to have first dibs as to what was submitted, like first looks before anybody else. But there was a constant turn down for any type of energetic device that used the sun's rays, like a solar panel, but that was more than 20, anything that was 21 or more % efficient, it would be deemed as it would be denied or bought up and silenced and deemed as a national security priority. Anything that was, so in other words, what I'm trying to say is there were solar panels that vastly surpassed the current amount of absorption and conversion to energy that we now have, that were done back then, that were then attempted to be brought out and simply due to the system, not like nowadays, you can film it with your phone and put on TikTok, say hey to the world like Parkenstein did there, but that it was happening. It was, and you had people claiming 100% 150% efficiency of transfer from solar to electric. So it's been there.
And
they want scarcity, they want dependency.
Right. Because like you said, the system's got to work like a 30-year mortgage. If not, it's not. Man,
when are we going to fucking overthrow this thing? What are we doing here?
It's going to collapse of its own.
Yeah, I've heard that a bunch. They said that the Bolshevik Revolution as well, and they just sat by and didn't do anything. So at what point are we just going to go? Yeah, we're done. Like with the waiting, like what? Yeah, what are we doing?
Well, you're doing it. I mean, you're doing it, Brandon. You're building your alternative, and I think that's what you need to do.
And I'm not saying break out the guillotines or anything. I'm not saying that. I'm saying just unsubscribe from the bullshit that they're feeding you, and the thing will die. That's it. That's all you've got to do.
I think to your point, I think that's why we're seeing so much of what we're seeing in the world now, because the system is in chaos, because many are unplugging. Now, it would be great if more unplugged, but I think that's part of what we're seeing as well. Not to get into it because it gets very political quickly, and I'm sure that's deliberate by those that are curating all of this. But certain, wars, certain things come up, and it's almost how convenient.
It always seems right on time.
And how convenient in relation to many things. People coming out with free energy devices that they're now posting from their phones. Many different things, not just this kind of stuff, but it just seems quite timely.
Yeah, and Hegelian dialect is riddled throughout our history. I mean, it's constant. Yep. Oh, here's a problem that might happen. Oh, son of a bitch, 6 months later, guess what?
Well, that's guess
what also? We have a fix for it.
Yeah.
That takes 10 years to develop, but we just happen to have it in our back pocket.
Exactly, yeah.
For this once and a never seen it again thing. We have photos pulled up here for the audio-only audience that depict this it says January, it reads rather Wednesday to be specific, January 20th, 1915. Is it 13?
13 or 15?
I don't have my glasses on. You have glasses on. We're relying on you.
It's World War One, basically.
Okay.
I think 15.
But this is what's fascinating too, because it's just decimation. But you're talking 1915 to roll this thing out. But this wasn't a new technology at 1915. This had been honed and developed, and so maybe the test market for this were those early fires in the Washington area, and it just so happened again. Right, all over the country.
I think they were destroying the old world, and again, it's like, I just keep repeating this because it bears repeating. It's always the business district. It's always the financial district. It's always the downtown of the city after city after city that got decimated. And then they tell us that they were just built out of matchsticks, and the photos prove otherwise.
They're in the Pentagon. That's where
stone and masonry.
Right.
Exactly where the Pentagon got hit was where they held all the files for the $2 trillion missing, right?
I didn't know.
Isn't that ironic?
Shit.
Right there. And they all the people happen to be abandoned that area because of remodeling, though.
That's fun.
You guys know that the United States Patent Office twice burned down in the 1800s?
I believe it. Seems like the burning of the Alexandria Library over and over. It just kind of seems like just mini versions of that, and it's interesting to. I didn't know that, by the way. That's phenomenal. Dope. I didn't know. That's that's not phenomenal. It's phenomenal to hear, and it baffles me that people just how easily people can not remember something. And I'm not blaming people. I'm just saying. It's just, again, without things like the internet, and we see even with the internet, things can still be strongly manipulated. So with all of that, it baffles my mind that people, that many people, I'm sure there are others that are open to it, as we know, like people we know in our community know, but that a fair chunk of people just dismiss it and just go, what are we going to do? Like they just kind of, that's what makes me go,
I got to go to work on Monday, right?
Right. Well, that's
what they count on.
Right. Yeah.
And, it's effective, unfortunately. It was for me for a very long time.
No, it is very much so. I remember that feeling too, having, even in high school, having to go back to school or even after that at work, oh man, it's Saturday night. Okay, we got one more day and that's it, back to work. Yeah.
Right. It's odd. And if anybody out there is still in the work game, have you noticed that the weather is beautiful during the Monday through Friday, but it sucks ass on the weekend?
I know.
Isn't that funny?
I know. It's interesting.
Almost like they can control that too. Now, this is interesting. October of 1934. I wanted to make sure that we had this pulled up here before we talked about it, but it looks like, I don't know what the hell.
Top of that magazine said Uncle Sam's secret tunnel system.
Oh, bad. We will go back to this aerial landing field. Now, what did we just talk about? The solar photocell. It says right here, it reads 1934. Recent experiments in the conversion of the sun's rays into electric power have led to an unusual idea in aerial equipment.
Yes.
It is a dirigible that not only would get its power from the sun, but also provides space for a landing field in the air. Now, here's where I like it. The ordinary cigar-shaped dirigible, which is what's being reported constantly.
Yeah.
That's the phrasing used, cigar-shaped dirigible.
Yeah.
Would in effect have a slice taken from the upper half of the gas bag that would provide a large deck. But this is awesome. It's got a solar photocell, is what they call it, and they're planning for the majority of the top half of this damn thing to be a landing solar panels that would provide power, because they were very aware of it in the 30s.
Yeah.
And then, which again, this is not new technology back then if they're publishing it.
Right.
And then you have an airstrip in the middle of this. So, I mean, fascinating stuff. Why aren't we doing this today if it was just so easy back then?
The stability that would have been needed to operate those things as a landing pad and to park, to dock them at the top of skyscrapers as they did. They had to be precisely stable, and they had to been able to move them where they wanted exactly, precisely, and then hold them steady. That part is like just mind-boggling to me. How they had that
against wind.
They didn't float. Yeah, against wind, against air currents, which I guess is wind.
That one right there when they're putting it. Yeah.
There you go. There's your hangar.
Yeah, they call it ion wind or whatever that. Yeah, this is when the conflation of the scientific terms, and let's see, the contributor 1886 to that's the date created 1929. Graf Zeppelin arriving in New York for a second time. Yeah, see, so very interesting to see that this was something that was definitely there.
And then fascinating as well, you have footage all over the place of these hangars just being destroyed. Destroyed. It's like you couldn't think of anything. Grain storage, you couldn't think to lease that out. You couldn't think of making it a skate park.
No, because you got to erase the evidence for everything. So you got to clean it all up, right?
That's right.
Turn it into a world fair.
Yeah.
And then destroy it immediately. But my God, what a cool time. I mean, it just, all the people gave a shit. You know, this isn't, look at public transit now and then think of this train right here.
Yeah.
And the ornateness of it. They just cared. And they made the place beautiful because they could.
It's
and they
true.
knew that it made people happy because they were into that.
It had to have been built with an economy of abundance, not of scarcity.
I'm with you.
Different iteration of civilization entirely than what we're used to.
It's
Right.
the Göbekli Tepe idea that they couldn't have been this hunter-gatherer nomadic nonsense because they had all that time to carve that shit and to build that shit.
Right.
Look at this.
Yeah.
Again, audio-only audience. We're just oodling over these
I like what
pictures
this
we're
comment
pulling up.
said. Open your eyes, my friends. The future is in the past. Yeah.
Yes.
There you go.
It's this idea of entropy, right? That
Right,
we're
right,
not
right.
the best thing. We're not going up for the most part.
Right.
It's so interesting that it seems to have gotten to a point, and I don't consider myself in one of the whatevers, but it seems to have gotten to a point where you make society so whatever, you know, dumb, let's say, these zombifications, and who knows what they have planned for these folks, whatever they are. But then you have a large populace, or at least a handful of us out here going, what the fuck is going on here, that are able to find this, that are digging this up, that are talking about it, that are showing it. So what's the point, I suppose? Like, what do they plan to do? What do y'all think?
Well, as I interpret, do their best to make sure none of this comes out or comes back, and then kind of just let it simmer in history and make very subtle, alternative, dumbed down, or minutia based versions or subversions of this, and then from there basically do the whole buy the car, rent the battery. That's if you want to blunt what some of these elements are thinking, in my view, that seems to be the case. I don't see what these crappy elements would gain out of bringing this out.
No, of course not. And this is the question. So how far are we going to take this? How much are we going to let this happen?
Right. By the way,
yes, the lights from the World's Fairs.
Yeah, if that's not, and
look right here, it's the towers.
That's what I'm saying.
It shows you exactly how it's oriented.
Exactly. Those, you can, I'm not saying they
7.
are, but you could say again, electrodes, so you have the spark gap in between all of them. Then as they drop down, it could be withdrawn for power. I'm not saying that's what these were, but it seems like that's something that could have been.
God, look at the scale. And
I'd like to take a stab at that, Brandon. It's like, I think what you just said there, I think as this system continues to collapse and the institutions continue to implode and we become less and less relying on it because we can't depend on it, we have to go back to what the alternatives are. And so we're rediscovering, holy shit, look at what they had in the past. And so maybe this is a good segue moment to say that I'm working with a Rife machine, which
will you explain for those that aren't familiar?
Well, I'll explain what I can, and then I'm going to hand the baton, maybe Dave, to you.
Sure.
Brandon, to you, to maybe explain further how it actually works, because that's one of the questions that I had coming into this. So I guess this is my coming out moment on, to the podcast world, is that a month and a half ago, the Reader's Digest version of it is that I've got pancreatic cancer. And so this has just been unfolding over the last month and a half, and it's just been a big shock, and to me, to my family, and just like a lightning bolt, speaking of thunderbolts, just out of nowhere, and it hit us really hard. So that's why I haven't been doing much of, the podcasting world lately, and why I'm really appreciative being here with you guys and spending time. So my speech is a little halted because I have to strain a little extra to muster the energy. So a dear friend of mine who's a naturopath in Ellensburg, Washington, has a Rife machine which he loaned to me. And so in addition to doing the mainstream protocol, I'm doing as much as I can with the naturalistic, supplements, and part of this side of things is working with this rifle machine that he loaned me. And I've done a couple of sessions so far, and now I'm in this every other day regimen, and I'm just going to continue. I'm going to continue for the next 6 months while they do the chemo, and I might have to deal with surgery. I don't have to get into all that too bad right now, but it's just what I'm looking forward to, and I'm excited. I'm excited to be able to actually take something of like Tesla tech and apply it directly to my life that might make a difference for me between, well, it's going to give me a better chance. Let me just put it that way.
Right.
Of getting this out of my system. And I know that I will. I have no question that I will. I just have so much support and so much love, and it's just been incredible. So the Rife machine is working with, as I understand it, plasma technology. There's a plasma tube on it, and it's using somehow electromagnetic frequencies. Dave, correct me all over the place here.
If you want, I can jump in. Basically,
do it.
There are many different versions. Many people have made their own and different interpretations. There's some that also have the Tesla healing box stuff, where you go and they have like this plasma, what's it called? Like sort of xenon light bulb type looking thing that's kind of put all over the body, and it cures them. If not permanently, at the very least temporarily. People gotta, whether it's with cancer, depression, or any type of physical ailment, people go back once a month to get it. Whether it's with blindness, they can see again. The idea is essentially, which Rife was onto, in my opinion, which I agree with, which is essentially there is a magneto-acoustic resonance that is within the ether or the vacuum that is through, in like the same way a spring is connected to other springs, like slinkies, is linked essentially to our internal nervous system, that below that has sort of like a submanifold structure to it that is electrical in nature, and that when you use magnetism to confine the device or the energies in a certain sort of cavity-like way towards the body, what happens is this natural blueprint of reality then resets itself. Sort of like how a film reel, if it's all damaged, it can then you can sort of like, you tape it back together or whatever. This brings out a whole new copy of that film reel, if you think about film reels inside of your genes or genomes. And so what happens is that there's more than one method to this, but basically it speaks to the idea of either zapping or restoring through basically topology, higher symmetry, electromagnetics, your genomes back to the way they were. And your body knows this, not only because it has the immune system actually this is not, I don't know if it's public or not, but the immune system has its is sort of like its own organ, which has its own memory, which allegedly connects to this electrical database, which some have argued is the Akashic Records or not. It's not for me to say, but basically taps this and essentially either zaps whatever ailment you have out of the genome and then gives it a fresh start. Or if you have, for example, each cell, think about each cell in our body as a stack of books. We think of it as just one, but it speaks to fractality. Within the cell, say it's comprised of 10 books, and right now, book number 10 is what is in this material reality, and it's filled with cancer. These devices were able to, say, take book 2, which was at a point in time when book 2 is a version of book 10, but just in the past, when book 10 was healthy. And you take book 2 and bring it up to book 10 and replace it.
So many questions,
right?
So many questions, and I love this. Matthew, are you cool with me? Just
actually, if I could say very quickly, there was a gentleman, Dr. Peter Garyaev, that was mysteriously died. He was nominated for this stuff for the Nobel Prize in 2021, and then it was mysteriously retracted. He had something called linguistic wave genetics, because he found that through magnetism and lasers and audio and RF frequency can be subbed out for sound, so you don't have to use both. He found that basically words have restorative memory in them that can also cure people and other things like that. And they basically would do things like get pictures from when sick people were kids and healthy, and then even audio clips, and play them during the medical sessions in combination with certain methods like this. So there's more than one. I'm not claiming to know all of them, but I understand the concept in terms of how they operate. And I'm just being super vague here on it, but that's the gist of it.
First of all, amazing. Generation Z / Patreon / Generation Z located down there as well. Matthew, thank you so much for saying what you said, for showing up here.
Yes.
We know that your physical body on book 10 is doing what it's doing right now for whatever reason. You've been offered this experience. Also, I do want to say, though, because you didn't, and that's just who you are, that there is a GoFundMe set up for you and your family that we would also, it's linked below, guys. Check it out. Your wife set it up. She's amazing. So
my sister set that up.
Sister set it up. Okay, yes, apologies.
My dear
shout
sister.
Shout out.
Shout out to Mary Carol.
Mary Carol, shout out, darling. That is going to be located down there, and just thank you. So wanted to make sure that we said that, and that we're all here for you. Okay.
Yes, yeah.
And of course, all the ways to find Matthew, his website and the YouTube are going to be located down below as well. Shoot him a message, guys. Let him know that how you feel. So in this, Dave,
yes,
what you talked about is the architecture behind everything, like this idea that when amputees or something experience a loss of a limb, that they feel this phantom limb.
Right.
Do you think that that's what's tapping in the nervous system, sort of remembering that there's something there?
Yeah, that's this speaks to like the Luc Montagnier phantom DNA experiment that he did in 2010 that he was told not to publish, and then just with some water and some copper and some RF frequencies and some electrical impulse into he basically transported DNA into another jug of water, which was that spooky action at a distance and stuff. So the idea is that if you could do that, then you could do a form of what you could call organic grafting, where you're basically taking nice fresh DNA from someone else or what have you in a jar of water, and then you put someone else in a particular location that can then facilitate the replacement of those cells, replacing the cancer ones. And it's not invasive, nothing, because that's your spooky action at a distance, right?
Yes. Immediately I go to, then why is any resource necessarily flushed out? Because if you can have access to any resource ever, like let's say book 1 or 2 of Earth had a ton of trees and shit on it, right?
Oh, why is it flushed out? That's just the perception of time in a linear manner. That's why.
Is it this entropy thing we're talking about?
It's the entropy thing. Okay. But it doesn't mean that it's gone. It just means that we don't perceive it in the moment anymore.
Like time.
But it's exactly, which speaks to what you call potentials in the vacuum or slash the ether. But you can extract it from the quote unquote past, if you will, but it's not really the past. It's always been there.
It's resonant.
Yes, it's resonant constantly. That's why, not to get off track, but that's also what's led to things like there was an Italian article in the 60s, I think it was, that said that quick publication and retraction saying that the Vatican had a device that could see into the past, because the past is not really the past. Everything is now. Right. So then you can take that same application. So if book 1 to 10 is no longer a cancer cell, it's a timeline. So if we're on book 10, you can bring book 2 back to that screen on your device.
So then does he think like book 2 Matt did? Does he fart like book 2 Matt did? Does his taste change? Does he play an instrument that he hasn't picked up?
Because it is Matt.
This is the question, though, is like what of it does it affect? So what we're talking about here as well is that Carillion photography, right? Where you can cut a leaf and you can see the design of the leaf that you've cut. So there is a complete, let's say, leaf there, which then we can scale that up to anything.
Right.
So if we're talking about then removing cancer from the body, where does that fall into the work with water and work with dis-ease in the body being really a mental thing? Because then if you brought book 2 Matt here, he wouldn't think the same. He would be thinking book 2 thoughts, because he wouldn't have created, book 2 didn't create the disease in the body. So the question is that how disease is created? Because we've just talked about that if it's a reset of sorts, the mind is what would be controlling the physicality of the body.
This is where this goes right to something that has been largely controversial, and because of this reason and others, I think it's exactly that, basically. It's
paradox.
It's paradoxical, and it's something that actually that Professor Dr. Peter Garyaev actually spoke to as well. So you're not, I'm going
to go off on a show sometime, because I've come to a lot of feelings about this place and this reality and sort of paradox and all that shit. I'm not going to do it on this one, but we'll talk about it at some point. But it's fascinating. So what you're saying here is that you can get this thing, which resembles what I guess the Mormons talk about or Scientology talks about an e-meter, right?
Right.
Where they hold this thing, they hold the 2 wands, and those folks are able to tell. It looks exactly like this.
The idea as well, by the way, the energy, in terms of if people say, well, you can't ever destroy energy because it can't be created or destroyed, just recycled. Well, in that regard, I would say, sure, if you're zapping out the cancerous energy within a cell or a genome or a tumor or what have you, the same way that for those listening or watching, the same way that you have like a alpha decay or beta decay in a nuclear system, how it just kind of decays into the ether and it's still there, but it either becomes something else or resonates into the ether, sort of like how a fly just flies off and that's
or
it.
smoke.
That's the right smoke. It's the same thing in this regard as well. You just have a sort of zapping off of it, and the energy's just gone into the ether and has now taken its own path of being appropriately reset as well.
God, you know what I thought of when you're talking about this is claymation. Okay.
Oh yeah.
So claymation, stop animation, right? They use the same bit of clay, right? But they mold it into different things. So it's this pose now, and maybe now it's a horse in another shot instead of this guy that they use, right? But that clay, same material used to make that one figure, is now in another shot something else, has been reorganized.
Yeah.
But that doesn't take away the fact that once existed in that mold, and there's an image of it to prove it.
Which goes right back to everything is happening all at once simultaneously, because it goes right back to, again, what you just described there is literally how you could remove, for a case in a cancer cell, or for example, have what that article discussed about viewing another point in time. You just would have to take this device to the area in which the certain events you want to view the past of allegedly occurred. And then you can see all the events that occurred because of the entropy in that particular spot. So
like you can tell how old a tree is by how much it's grown.
You could to the point where, if properly developed, you could see on the screen a tree, that tree or that spot where the tree is now, up to millions of years ago, because time's not a thing.
Yeah, I've thought about this. Mary and I have talked about this, that when we make changes out here on the ranch, like we just did a huge cleanup thing. We got that damn light out, which is great.
Right.
So we call those like timeline markers for us. And we think that this is one of the concepts talked about with The Simpsons, that Matt Groening has access to this yellow cube. And the reason the characters are yellow is because of the inference that it's the yellow cube device that he's using to make all these crazy predictions that are.
Well, there's a lot of, to be fair, there's a lot of people out there that will say that have leaked that quantum computers are exactly that, except they're just scaled down publicly. Like the IBM public one in here in the South is scaled down or scaled back. It's been in actual facilities, and you have these blue orbs coming out of them, following the scientists around. The blue orbs are conscious. This whole notion of interacting directly with the ether or parts of it, and and being able to do exactly what you said. Apparently that's why, again, ask someone what a quantum computer is. Very few people know. It's just they know that it's something better.
Yeah, well, quantum's thrown around, and that's
right.
Nobody knows what the hell quantum is anyway, right?
A couple. I mean, you could say it's the smallest packet of matter or information. The quanta of something. But at the end of the day, it's been so arbitrarily thrown around, and in my opinion, deliberately, so as to just intimidate people and go. You look at a physics article and you see quantum and you see lasers and you see scientists in a lab and you see these words like qubit or whatever, and oh my god, okay, listen, I can't get into this, because by the time I even think I'll get it, it'll be time for work anyway. So just kind of let the guys that know what they're doing do it, right? And that speaks to the system in general.
So I got a big follow-up question to what you were raising before, Brandon. But you guys want to see this machine?
Yes, please. I have more questions about it, honestly, because how long have you been working with it? Have you noticed any changes? Yeah, thank you.
I'll show you the setup, and then we can keep chatting about it. So here's, tell me when it comes up.
Look at that handsome fella.
Yes.
Nice socks, dude.
Yes.
Sort of drained expression. Forgive me. I've got cancer.
So
you're temporarily accessing cancer, right?
Yeah. I'm interacting with it.
There you go. You're flipping it off.
Here I thought, this machine, again, my dear friend Jeff, that naturopath that loaned this to me, bless his heart. Here I thought that this thing was just killing cancer cells. I had a very simplistic understanding. I thought it was just zapping the bad stuff, preserving the good. And I didn't quite understand how it did that. But after you said what you said about it, Dave, it's got me really kind of scratching my head. And I think this piggybacks off of what Brandon was saying, is if like book 10 is like maybe like a version of a cell, an echo of the cell's past But how do we know? How does this machine know that that isn't the traumatized cell? Because supposedly I've had this in me for 15 to 20 years, unbeknownst to me, right?
Wow.
That's a good, third of my life right there.
Right.
50. So that's a lot of my life that this thing has been incubating. And from what they said, there's a number of things that can cause pancreatic cancer, and I don't fit the bill on most of them, like obesity, alcoholism, heavy tobacco use, there's like abusing the body sort of. Yeah. And then the other things can be genetic, and we don't really have this in my family at all. Right. And then the other thing can be trauma. And I can think back 15, 20 years ago, and I had a lot of stuff going on at that time that was traumatic. Yeah. I'm doing a lot better now, even with the cancer. So I can see that. I can see how these shocks to my system.
Matt, forgive me. You're trying to ask basically how would the machines like this or others know what to reset and what not?
Yeah. Correct.
Yeah.
Oh,
what's it? Yeah.
Because it's like, dude, I like my earlobe that way.
It's very simple
fine,
because if it needs to reset to basically without getting too complex, it's not complicated, it's complex. And what I mean by that is so if it had, let me try and phrase this the right way. If they were, by definition of them being cancerous, it kills life at a very small fractal level. So by definition of life being life, if it was meant, it doesn't fit. So that's how it essentially if that makes sense.
It removes what's no longer needed.
I'm trying to simplify all the physics terms and stuff very quickly at the top of my head, but that's
and this would answer questions. So it's life-threatening things. So if you have gray hair just naturally because of aging, it's not going to make you look like Brad Pitt in his 20s. Okay. And it's not going to do the time machine thing where you show up as a baby.
Right.
Okay. Right. So what it's doing is it's just taking healthy and rebalancing you to where you should be health-wise. But then the question is, if you rebalance your shit health-wise...
electromagnetically, it's essentially removing what's not supposed to be there, and the way that it knows what's not supposed to be there versus what is literally the existence of life itself. So if there's a detection, the same way that when you get close to a person, this person has a great vibe, or this person, holy crap, their vibe is terrible. Think about that on the electron, proton, neutron, that kind of level. And what essentially happens in the cells is, by definition, if the same, just like a 1 and a 0, the ones know that the zeros are 0 because by definition they're not ones.
Right.
And
right.
Yeah.
It's more simplistic. I see. And I have all the what's going on.
The book stacking thing, and I want to be very clear. I hope I'm sure this is a fantastic machine. I'm not going to sit here and say that I know for a fact that these machines also do the book stacking thing. The book stacking thing is a little bit more of a complicated situation, but the zapping and all of that, just by being in the same room as what we just discussed, the ones know that the zeros are zeros because they're not ones by definition. That seems to be what's happening here.
Well, it's a pretty serious piece of machinery. I mean, if you've got to put it on one of those carts that we used to get wheeled in a TV and VCR in when we were in school, right? When the teacher was gone. That's a serious piece of machinery. There's a lot going on here.
Yeah. So this manual that I'm thumbing through right now, there's all these preset functions, and it reminds me of the books, the books that we had when we were kids on how to solve the Rubik's Cube. You just go by step in the right order. And so then you have the frequency, set frequency meter here, and then the frequency dial, and then this whiz bang, gizmo at the bottom. And you have to just go through. This is the what do you call it, generator? Forgive me, I don't. No worries. Follow the instructions.
It's got the UV component.
If I could say the UV component, I was going to say as well. Think for a moment, guys, to answer your guys' question. It's kind of like saying, how does water know when it's not in water? Because by definition, it's not. And then once it's out of water, it gets dry, if that makes sense.
It's more of a mind fuck, but it does make sense.
Yeah.
It's more trippy. It's more of like a stoner thought.
It's paradoxical.
Right. Yeah. It's fucking-doxical.
Because by definition, it knows it's not. And how do you know that? Well, depending how deep we want to go, just like Richard Feynman says, there comes a point where we don't know crap about crap. We don't have an adequate definition of force. We don't know what energy is after you get past the electron. We don't know.
Well, is it because of this idea that we're creating it as we go kind of a thing? And so we don't know?
That's part of it.
Because we haven't created it yet?
Yeah, the idea as well is, without veering off track too much here, is with what great stuff Matt is showing us, is that electromagnetism, electricity and magnetism are two energies that represent, two representative energies of the same underlying force.
Okay.
Because by definition, you have to have two of something starting out, because with just one, you have no focal point or pillar to compare it to.
Yeah, relativity.
What's the underlying
Like,
force?
I'm here, you're there, Matthew's over there.
That's a great question. You can, some people, again, I'm not saying, I don't know what it is. You can, what we know is that it exists, but some have called it the ether, the isness,
Quantum foam,
whatever. Yeah, magic. It's hard to say.
So with the ether, when I hear the ether, there's I think of it in two layers. There's the materium, and then there's the consciousness aspect.
I completely agree. The non-material, yeah.
Is there to your knowledge, is there like a succinct way to define what the ether is, though?
Great question.
To a certain extent, but then there comes a point where there's layers to the ether, like an onion. It's not just one swimming pool, it's swimming pools and swimming pools inside of swimming pools.
Because it makes up everything. So it's like trying to observe time in a world that operates on time.
Right. It's like saying, can an onion just have one layer? Well, then it wouldn't be an onion.
Interesting.
You see, that's probably the best way I can put it without getting all fancy talk or condensed matter physics, quantum chromodynamic talk, and all of that.
Is there an accepted? I know accepted definition is probably not the right question, but is there an operating definition amongst people working in your field, for instance?
Not publicly. Classified, yeah. But not publicly.
You don't get it,
because again, if there were a working definition that the mainstream scientific system approved of, if you will, then you would go right back to all these scientists around the world having the creativity and inspiration and passion of the people that built the pneumatic stuff, and then you'd have a problem again, because then the system couldn't control them.
Nice callback. Way to wrap it all home. You know what I mean?
It's the same playbook every freaking time. That's the problem.
It's true.
Where's the whistleblower in the alternative scientific field to just come out and say, hey guys, this is what the ether is?
Where's the whistleblower?
The whistleblower.
There have been many of them. A lot of them have unfortunately died. There's a few that are still alive. But I mean, for example, I can give an example. Tom Bearden was screaming about it since the 70s all the way up until he died a couple years last year. He did videos, put them all out there. This kind of spoke at events before the internet came out. There have been people, but again, it speaks to the suppression of the system. If people haven't seen it, then they don't think it's there, and understandably so. It's like the same way when people say, and I don't mean this towards you, Matt, but when people say, well, how come there aren't anyone, if this UAP stuff was all real, then how come there haven't been people in the past talking? There have been. Like, I can give 10 names off the top of my head right now. There have been. Like Don, like these guys with credentials that you wouldn't believe. So it's either they're bullshitting when they're about to die, because why? Because they want to make money for their kids, even though they're going to die, maybe. But then at the same time, I can go Boyd Bushman, Don Phillips, Clifford Stone, Phil Schneider. I can just keep, what's his name there? Anyways, yeah, I'm really tired right now. Sorry,
John Burrish. I mean, a lot of those guys. Yeah.
John Burr. I mean, and it's an interesting thing because you see the main points consistently spoken across all these different. What's his name? Philip Corso. This kind of stuff. So there have been people.
But is that some sort of even surface level campaign that was always running, that they knew
you have people, for example, that know a lot more than what they're letting on, but they put in their books only so much, or their interviews only so much, because they themselves feel like that people aren't ready for it. And that's another debate too. Who are they to say? Yeah. And so no, it's true. Well, this goes right back to the whole thing of these whistleblowers, whether it's for cancer or anti-gravity or whatever, have come out and written books and all of that. But the thing is, and this is where you kind of get a back and forth, and then I'll stop after this, but people say, well, if there's one thing you find in their book that's not true or misleading or something, how can we believe them? And I say to that, absolutely correct. And for some reason, you still go home and believe CNN because they have retractions every other week. So
on page 50.
After
they've ruined somebody's life.
Exactly. Yeah. So what I say to that is, it's a fair point, but this goes both ways. No matter what.
And
So
two, though, those missing parts of the equation are really hints that they can't give that piece, but there's only a couple of issues. So if you're only finding one or two issues, maybe that's left in there deliberately. There's something Bud Hopkins talks about in his books as well about like, hey, there's parts of the cases that are ubiquitous and very consistent, but I don't publish them because I don't want anyone being able to fake this, or it's sort of my metric kind of a thing. Yeah. And so you need to like earn it almost.
So that's why when people say, well, I can't believe this person because, you know, even though what they said in their book, 95% of it lines up with what others have said, even in previous generations or even more recent ones, because the 5%, you know, they got up in their feelings or their ego and they wanted to make up a story because it made them seem cool or whatever. No problem. But if that's the case, then you have to go home and you have to cancel your cable and all of that, because on that principle alone, you should not be listening to any media source because they retract constantly.
It's the Bill Hicks thing. If you don't think drugs have done good things for you, go home tonight and take all your albums, all your CDs, all your tapes, and burn them.
Exactly.
All those people that you love for real fucking high on
this
drugs.
is what I'm saying. Exactly. So the same people that say, I've never seen a UAP, or, you know, this stuff in the Antiquitech, it's not possible or whatever. Say, you know, I've said this to someone, you like football? They go, yeah. When was the last time you've been to a game? Well, I never been. How do you know the games are real?
My man.
It's the same logic under the, it's real. It's real. How?
I've been to a game. The simulation rendered it for me.
Right. No, I know what you're saying, but I'm just trying to make a point.
But I don't if it's not there.
Well,
I get it.
I'm just trying to make a point. Yeah.
We talk about like China's not a thing right now. You know what I mean? And into a degree, if you want to look at like reality from that perspective. Well, this is why, to your point, and to your point as well, Matt, I don't blame people when, for example, you see an event happen, good or bad, and people spend the next 10 years on Twitter debating if it actually happened or if it was done on a soundstage. Yeah. I don't blame people. I don't. That's why I respect a lot of what you do here in terms of not watching the news and stuff, because it's just you're going to spend your entire day figuring out what's good versus not good. And that's a great way to distract people, because before, when they were just constantly working, right, before you had phones, the work was enough of a distraction. But now people can work and be on their phones. So what do? You got to up the level of the chess game from the negative elements that are playing it. So now you see people are now busy debating and getting into freaking Twitter wars over gotcha type statements. And now no one's actually getting anywhere. There's little bubbles. So these whirlpools of energy suck. And it's just like, people will get stuck there. Constantly. I mean, we saw this with a lot of narratives where they'll give you some sort of surface thing, and then a lot of folks will get stuck there, and then it turns so many, like 95%.
Dude,
like you said.
I had a similar discussion. Sorry, this is just getting me going, because I had a similar discussion with a very close family friend some months ago. And I used the same statement about the, CNN or other media outlets retracting, right? And they said, no, that's BS or whatever. I sent them full-on lawsuits. I literally sent them the actual lawsuits. I sent them peer-reviewed papers on some other things we were talking about. And basically, they refused to even look at them.
Yeah.
They just said, stop with your BS. I said, these are lawsuits from top lawyers. These are peer-reviewed papers from what are considered to be highly respected medical professionals in, Eastern Europe and what have you. They won't even look at them. It's like there's this invisible wall where if CNN didn't tell them, then no,
it's not on TV.
Yeah.
Which gets back to resonance and vibration. They just cannot vibe with the truth that you're presenting.
Exactly. Yep.
And who knows what you're presenting is the truth, because it's your truth, because their truth, and then that's the whole. And we'll go over truth on another episode. But guys, Matthew, if you want, man, I'm going to give you the last on this anyway. But if you had any more questions, absolutely pass them out. But I definitely want to just remind everybody, check the show description down there. Not only audio only audience for the pictures and stuff. We're having a good time with it. Check for the video version of this, and you can share in that, as well as Matthew's GoFundMe. Yes. Absolutely, and all the ways to find him and his incredible work, as well as Dave and all his work and how to find him, Patreon/Generation Z. All of it linked below. Thank you both, gentlemen, again. And then I'm going to get out of your way and let you guys close it out.
Well, thank you. I've done enough talking, so I'm good. Thank you. It was a blast.
I'm always fascinated listening to you, Dave.
Thank you, man.
You're such a wealth of knowledge. And as far as questions, how does a Rife machine work and what is the ether? I think pretty much covers it. So
sure. I mean, that's the most I could probably describe without having to start pulling out papers and, talking to all this stuff. So,
well, I'm going to go back and listen to this episode again and,
awesome.
really, sink into it. I try to understand this stuff as well as I can, but at the end of the day, if it's working, great. If it's helping me, if we're finding, as the world does what the world's going to do around us and becomes less dependable, as it's trying to make us more dependent on it. Speaking of paradox, and we find that these old technologies are useful again to us. I think let's just go for it, man. And that's why, because it's going to make the world a better place, the new world that we're creating together. So I'm so excited that, there's folks like you out. You fellas are fantastic. I'm honored to be plugged in to what you've got going on. Thank you, Brandon, for bringing me into this. And this has been great. This is the most podcasting I've done in the last month and a half. So
thank you,
it's
guys.
Great to be
without you, Matt, we wouldn't be here. So thank you so much. It's been fantastic.
And cheers to both of you.
Thank you.
My work, again, dreamdesignbuild.org for my architecture work. Marvelous Old World. I'll put this up, Brandon, whenever you say it's okay. And I've got a lot of irons in the fire. I've already, before all this, I had more ideas than time. But maybe as a result of this, there's going to be some, priority shifting, and I'm able to keep up with my research. So I've just got, I've got piles of research that I really, have to want to convert into presentable format, because it's exciting stuff that I'm discovering. And a lot of it goes back to Kelly's melted bricks. So I'm going to be getting back together with her and continuing that exploration moving forward. So yeah, lots more to come. Thank you so much. And I look forward to next time.
Welcome to the Agrihood. Carnes Crossroads is a new home community with a farm-to-table lifestyle. Just outside of Charleston, here, community is defined by gathering together and our deep connection to nature. Our future farm and amenities are taking root and blooming into something you've always dreamed of in a fun, healthy, and social environment. Come home to the Agrihood, where you can plant roots and thrive.
Learn more at carnescrossroads.com.